All right. Mr. Willis, good afternoon. Could you introduce yourself, sir? Tell us your name and your DOC number, please.
My name is Jerry L Willis, 99377.
All right, Mr. Willis, we have today, this afternoon, your sister and your brother, who I think you can see on the screen. They want to speak on your behalf. We have Miss Jane Bush and Mr. Jack Willis, and we're going to ask them to speak at the appropriate time. First, let me just ask you, Mr. Willis, you're here this afternoon. You're seeking a commutation of your sentence. You were sentenced in October 1982 to a life sentence for a second-degree murder conviction in Calcasieu Parish. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Would you answer Mrs. Jackson's questions? Your case has been assigned to her.
All right. Can you hear me, Mr. Willis?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you don't have any hearing problems?
I don't have a hearing problem, no.
Okay, you're 84 years old?
Yes, ma'am.
When do you make 85?
November the 23rd.
And you've been in prison for about 42 years, is that correct?
41 for sure.
Okay, all right. This shooting or this killing that happened at a bar, tell us what happened. How did you end up killing somebody?
Well, I thought my life was in danger.
Well, why don't you just kind of start from the beginning? You were at the bar?
Well, ma'am?
You were at the bar?
No, there was no violence.
No,
If you want to know the truth,
I do.
the truth, is that important to you?
Yes, sir, very much so.
Okay, well, a girl told Tommy Chapman I needed beating and he was going to do it. She put 2 on me already and I talked them out of it. And Tommy came on to me and he backed me past my car. And I told him, Tommy, this ain't for me and you. We supposed to be friends. I thought Tommy was a friend of mine. And he said I had to get me some of it. He told me 6 times I had to get me some of it. And that's how it started.
Can you turn your speaker up over there?
I did. That's it.
All right, so just kind of speak in this general direction.
Not like normal.
Got it. You got it. LSP, can you hear us?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Cowan?
No, this
Mr. Cowan?
is Mr. Willis.
I'm sorry, Mr. Willis.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we lost our sound when you were talking, so I couldn't hear what you were saying. Now, you did say that some female wanted you to beat up.
No, I didn't say that. I said she told Tommy to beat me up. And he came after me, that's all.
Listen, why did she want Tommy to beat you up?
Well, she tried to rob me one time and I pulled her hair and took my money back because she started talking stupid to me and telling me all kind of stuff. And she And then the next time I saw her, she said the payback's this and the payback's that. And that's when I left Pirates Landing and I went to Nola's, and that's where it happened at.
Okay, well, why did you go to Nola's?
Ma'am,
Why did you go to Nola's?
I went there, I thought I'd drink one more beer and go home, go to bed and get up and go to work in the morning.
Okay. Did you drink a lot back then?
No, I didn't drink much. I just drank a little.
But you went to 2 bars. Okay, so tell me how Tommy ended up getting killed. Is that the one who got killed, Tommy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, tell me how Tommy ended up getting killed.
Well, when he drawed his fist back to hit me, I shot him.
When did you get,
And
when did you get the gun?
I got it from a neighbor.
No, before you shot him, where was the gun? Where had it been?
My gun was in my belt.
Okay, so you had it on you
Yes, ma'am.
and you shot him.
I didn't shoot him until he drawed his fist back to step into a right.
Why did you shot him?
Yes, ma'am, I shot him.
What did you do after you shot him?
He stepped back and started windmilling his fist, and he come at me, and I ducked him. And when I ducked him, the guy standing by him threw a bottle past my head about 80 miles an hour, and it was howling and popping in my ear. And when it hit the ground, it shattered, and I knew it was a bottle that went by my head. I didn't know what went by my head. And then I turned to face the guy that threw the bottle. And I knew Tommy was gonna windmill me down again. He's gonna be at my backside. So I turned around and I shot him a second time. I knew when I shot him the first time, my life was over.
And where did you go after you shot him?
I went to my apartment and I packed up some of my things and I went to Houston.
Galveston, right?
Houston.
I thought you got arrested in Galveston.
I went to Houston.
Okay.
I got arrested in Galveston years later.
So how long after the killing did you get arrested?
I don't know. I went to Galveston, went to work in a machine shop, and I got busted down there, and they sent me back to Louisiana.
Well, how have you spent the last 42 years, Mr. Weller?
Well, I had a pretty rough life. I've been shot.
No, sir, listen to me. I'm asking you, what have you been doing in prison for the last 42 years?
Oh, okay. I worked at metal fab for 21 years in my trade.
All right,
I'm a machinist.
right. And you said that the reason that you hadn't taken a lot of programs, because you have not taken a lot of programs, is that you were basically working for 20 years as a prison machinist. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I took anger management and 100 hours.
Okay. And I see one substance abuse class. You've had 46 write-ups. Does that sound about right?
Well, before I went to work for Metal Fab, I had a lot of write-ups, but after I went to work for Metal Fab, I only had one write-up
Okay.
in 21 years.
So where's your family, Mr. Willis?
They're in Texas.
Or if you were successful and if you were to get out, where would you go? Who would look out for you?
My brother, Jack Willis.
And where's Jack?
He's probably on that
Now,
Zoom,
where does he live?
a little town south of Waco.
Okay, so he lives in Texas.
Yes, ma'am.
And your plan would be to go to Texas with your brother, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
The victim's stepdaughter is not opposed to your being granted relief, although you do have the DA and the judge and the sheriff's office and the Lake Charles Police Department opposed, but the victim's stepdaughter is not opposed to your getting out. Warden, what can you tell us about Mr. Willis?
About who?
You,
What can I tell them about you?
Oh,
So everything that you say about him is truthful. He has a little tiger. He only has taken anger management. He hasn't been a problem here in a while, so I don't have anything else to say.
okay, okay. Mr. Willis, how's your health?
it's pretty bad.
What's wrong?
They're treating me for prostate cancer. They're giving me pills, every big packs of pills, and then I take high blood pressure medicine.
Okay. Okay. All right. Ms. Renata, that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Could we hear from Mr. Willis, please? Mr. Jack?
You have to unmute.
Hello?
Yes, sir, we got it. Go ahead.
Well, I live in Copper's Cove. I just moved there recently. It's a small town south of Waco. Very nice little town with a couple of big lakes close by. And I'd like to see Jerry get involved in some fishing with me. And he's got 2 sisters, 2 nephews, and myself that are going to help him get situated and see that he has clothes and his necessities, and I'm going to help him with his Social Security. And he's got the 5 people that I mentioned. They're all willing to help him get straightened out and get his life back together. So I just hope that I can come down there soon and pick him up.
Yes, sir, thank you. And we have Ms. Jane Bush.
Yes,
Go ahead, ma'am.
pardon me.
Go ahead. What would you like to say to us?
We miss him terribly. We've tried to go down and visit with him as much as we could. However, the trip has gotten so long and so hard for some of us. My sister just recovered from cancer surgery, and she's not even able to be here today at my house. and we miss him. We need him.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. At this time, we're going to ask Mr. Jerry. Mr. Jerry, is there a statement you'd like to make to us before we vote?
Well, I'd sure love to go home to Texas. And I'd appreciate if you people would help me.
All right, thank you, sir. I think we're prepared to vote. Mrs. Jackson?
All right, Mr. Willis, my vote today would be to recommend a commutation, to 60 years because of your age, your health issues, and how long you've already served in prison. So that's my vote.
Okay, Mr. Roche?
Mr. Jerry, my
Yes.
vote is the same for the same reasons. Good luck.
Mr. Freeman?
I concur with both of my colleagues.
All right, and I do agree, my vote is the same, Mr. Willis. So on your behalf, we'll make that recommendation to the governor. Good luck to you, sir.
We recommend you for clemency, okay?
Okay, well, thank you.
Sir.
I sure appreciate you people.
Yes, sir. Mr. Warden Ambo, that concludes our business at your facility. We're going to adjourn. It's 4:02. Thanks for your help.
We do have the transcript that we can go into this. Richard pulled it up, so thank you for that. Man, he's an old man. He doesn't got much time left, so I had a feeling. He's 84 years old. He's been locked up for 41 years. You know, and he says that he did this because he was in fear for his life, but he also said that the second he fired the first shot, he knew that his life was over, and he ran away. So, from what I've read here, he just seemed like not a good guy. We can go through it. So, you know, some people might say a Bard style type fight, this, that. It's like 41 years. He's pretty much on his, he's on his way out. He said so nonchalantly, I pulled her here and took my money back. It's like, man. Okay. So apparently there are only 4 eyewitnesses. This is, and I'll put this link in the description, of the shooting which resulted in the death of a 40-year-old male victim. You know, that's the interesting thing about this. These weren't teenagers that were having a bar fight. This was 41 years ago. He was 41 himself. 43, I think. And the victim was 40. So like, that's just mind-boggling to think about that. It paints a whole new picture. I mean, he wasn't a teenager. Like, he's a 40-year-old man. 43-year-old man. Like, wow. Ugh. The defendant never denied that he fired twice into the victim's body, but he alleges that he was acting in self-defense. The only major conflict in the testimony between the defendant and the other 3 who testified as witnesses for the state. A synopsis of each of those witnesses' testimony is provided below. So on the evening of July 1st, 1982, John Mayers, age 22, was drinking at Noah's Lounge. I guess that's a witness. He observed the defendant making several passes at 2 female employees at the lounge, after which the victim, Chapman, intervened, requesting the defendant leave the girls alone. He observed no animosity between them. So, he's sitting at the bar and he sees this, this guy basically like annoying, a couple women. And maybe not. Maybe he was just innocently flirting with them. And, it's kind of like a power move by the other guy to say, hey, leave them alone. But we'll see what happened. Shortly returning, if you want. Okay. So he left the room to go outside, and then he shortly returns to Chapman saying, hey, if you want some trouble, you son of a, you can come outside. The victim finished shooting a game of pool, then walked outside. Wow, so he was like pretty cool about it. He's like, you know what, I'm just going to finish my game of pool. He did, and then he went outside. Mears stepped outside just before the victim did, and he testified that he saw the victim slowly walking, extending his hand toward the defendant, who was pointing a gun at Chapman's head, a gun he had pulled from his pants. So he's holding a gun. He's saying that he saw the victim with his hand out, so probably like walking like, whoa, whoa, but walking towards him. Or walk slowly, extending his hand. The victim walks slowly. Why don't you put the gun up? You don't want to hurt nobody. Why don't you just give me the gun? Well, during the victim's approach, the defendant took several steps backwards and then lowered the gun at Chapman's stomach and fired twice. The victim told Jean that he had been shot and then fell to his knees, whereupon Mears and Miss Mazzola put him into Mears' car and rushed him to the hospital. Early the next day, he had died from a loss of blood. Wow. Got to the hospital and they couldn't save him. I guess it's, stomach shots are messy. Mears testified that additionally that he did not immediately prior to the shooting hear the defendant say anything. It's kind of, Mars did not personally know either the victim or the defendant, and that he had not engaged in a dispute with the defendant, that he, I'm saying Mars, it's Mears, and a fat guy had not approached the defendant in a threatening or otherwise manner. The significance of this will become apparent later. It's interesting how this is written. It's almost written like a novel in a way. It's like, fat guy, and there are like that Jean Mazzola followed the victim outside the lounge and saw the actual shooting, and that Mears heard two shots which were followed a short time later. So right now they're kind of comparing the different witness statements, the origin of which was not established. The defendant fled the scene of the shooting but was arrested approximately 6 months later in Gladstone, Texas, which he had to make very clear where he was. He's like a grumpy old man now. On the night of the shooting in question, Barbara Ann Connors was employed at Noah's Lunch. Now I guess we're going to hear her side of the story. In a quasi-managerial capacity. There it is again, like quasi-managerial. She had personally known the victim for approximately 6 months and had seen the defendant several times, maybe 2 to 3 at the lounge. On 2 separate occasions, the defendant had that evening made overtures to Miss Corners and Miss Mazzola, each of which resulted in the victim requesting the defendant to leave the woman alone. However, Miss Corners testified that Chapman, the victim, acted without anger and in a non-aggressive manner. Sometime later, another woman, Anita Langley, came into the bar and engaged in a shouting argument with the defendant. I'm guessing this is the woman who he grabbed her hair. The victim calmed the female and assured her that the defendant would not harm her. Following this episode, the defendant stormed out the door. So basically, he was like showed up like 3 times by this guy who's being like the hero to these women. And that probably just really did not sit well with him. I mean, that's the picture I'm seeing painted here. He told Chapman in less than genteel words to come outside, young man. Victor Servant, who was the grandson of Nola, told Miss Corners that the defendant had gone outside for a gun. When Chapman went outside the bar, he was followed by Corners and Mazzola, the latter telling Chapman that the defendant had a gun. However, the victim said that he would talk to the defendant and calm him down, as he apparently had already done several times that evening. Well, come on, man. As Chapman approached the defendant in a slow and calm manner, requesting the defendant to give him the gun, the defendant kept backing up. As Connor heard the victim say, "Jerry, give me the gun." He said, "You don't want to hurt nobody, and nobody's going to hurt you." Wow. This is like a very different story than the one he gave the board, which was, what, a bottle flying by his head and haymakers? As the victim approached, the defendant shot him twice. The second coming after the victim had said, "I've been shot," and had turned around. A third shot was also heard, origin unknown. Miss Connors testified without objection that the victim was not a violent person and that she had never seen him carry a weapon, nor was he armed at the time of the shooting. She also testified that only the victim was approaching the defendant. Jean Mazzola, a witness who had been dating the victim, testified that the defendant and the victim had been shooting some games of pool, and that the defendant had gotten into several arguments with other patrons, each of which resulted in the victim acting as a peacemaker, calming the defendant in each instance. Why is this guy? This guy is like that loser who's like in the bar ruining everyone's night, and then he kills someone. The rest of Ms. Mazzola's testimony was merely cumulative of the previous provided. Several minor exceptions. The witness stated that Chapman was only 1 foot from the gun when it was fired. She also did not remember hearing the second shot that struck the victim. And she did not hear another shot as the defendant drove away. Ms. Mazzola testified that she had never known Chapman to carry a gun, nor did he ever threaten the defendant. She stated that all the victim had done was to keep the defendant out of trouble, and she had not seen anyone threaten the defendant. So this story is like they were actually playing pool, and he was calming him down when he was losing it. Initially, the defendant admitted that he had been previously convicted of 3 crimes: assault to commit murder. What? Assault to commit murder, illegal possession of firearm, and possession. What does that mean, assault to commit murder? It means that it was in like intention to commit murder, but he didn't. Regarding the victim's character, defendant testified that he was a friendly person, but was also sort of a bully. Yeah. And they had never exchanged crosswords. Defendant acknowledged that he had made passes at the woman and that he had been acting kind of a fool. No kidding. According to the defendant, Anita Langley, not present at the trial, had previously tried to cheat him out of money, and when she entered the lounge on the fateful evening, she began screaming that she was going to have the defendant whipped. The defendant stated that he feared for his safety, and when he saw John Roy Mears and a big fat boy walk into the lounge, so he attempted to leave, but upon so was followed out the door by the 2 men. At this time, Chapman was still in the bar. The defendant testified that he had convinced the 2 men that Miss Langley's situation was not worthy of a struggle and that they had returned to the lounge. When the victim jumped out the door, followed by the 2 other men, as Mears and the overweight Mr. X circled the victim. It's so interesting how they called him the big fat boy, because I guess they don't know who he is. It's like someone, and they like change, and then they call him the overweight man. It's interesting. Whoever wrote this, it's very colorful, very different than what I've seen. And the overweight Mr. X. I'm sorry, I did. Encircled. Okay, so the two other men and Mars and the overweight Mr. X circled the victim, saying repeatedly, "You got to get you. You got to get you some of it." Slowly advanced to the retreating defendant, who begged him not to come any closer and warned him that he was armed. The defendant testified that he tried to frighten Chapman into stopping, but his attempts were futile. So, in fear of his well-being, he fired into the victim's lower body. He had been aiming at his head after the first shot. Oh, so he was aiming at his head and then he lowered it and shot into the lower body. After the first shot, he stated that Chapman kept coming at him, that Mears threw a beer bottle at his head, so he fired another shot into the victim's body. Aha. So now he's saying after he shot, then a beer bottle, and he was coming at him. Oh, here's the defendant avers that the fat boy's name was called during the grand jury, but the prosecuting attorney disavowed any knowledge of whom the defendant was referring. So this almost seems like he made up the second character, that he didn't exist. Mears denies that he had thrown a bottle at the defendant or that he had even taken a bottle outside with him. Yep. After this exchange, Mears fled, and the fat boy grabbed the chicken. Oh no, the stricken. I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm laughing at this. It's just interesting to me. Chapman, whereupon the defendant fled in his car and was fired upon as he departed further. He testified that he fled because he didn't want to go to jail. Noteworthy is the defendant's testimony that he was armed when he entered Noah's lounge on that evening. Well, that he was being honest about. And that he sometimes did arm himself prior to entering the bar. Servant testified that Carner's Mazzola were outside at the time of the shooting, although he was himself was still inside the lounge. He further stated that the victim was not a violent person and that he had calmed Miss Langley down when the defendant challenged to go outside. Testified that he warned the victim to stay inside because the defendant had probably gone to get his gun, but Chapman ignored the warning, which is, at 40, the victim was 40 years old also? It's like, gotta be smarter than that. I feel like I'm not yet 40, and I just, someone tells me someone has a gun, I am not going to try to calm that man down. Yeah, he further stated that Mears did have a reputation for fighting in bars, and that it seemed at the time that the defendant did not want any trouble that night. To sum that up or to unpack that, there's basically like 4 witnesses that all kind of had the same story, which was this guy was just being a complete dick, for lack of a better word. And this other guy was just trying to kind of calm him down and kind of control the situation, but not being aggressive at all. He was in no fear for his life. This story he gave of haymakers and bottles flying, I don't believe it. And I think in what he said, it's proof of it. He said the second he shot, he knew his life was over. Not that he could have killed someone, but his life was over after his first shot. And then he shot a second time. And he has this other long record. He's just a bad guy, just wrecking lives wherever he went, it seems, until he took one. And in the end, in his 40s too. Then he shows up. You just want to, and he's, you know, they let him out just because he's served a long time. The only victim's relative that they're aware of, I guess, said they're not opposed, his stepdaughter. And I guess he has a family to go move into. Good luck to them, I'll tell you that. Now remember, this is a commutation hearing, so he needs to go to the governor. The governor needs to sign off on it. He needs to then have he needs to then have a parole hearing, which is usually just an automatic parole, but sometimes the governor doesn't sign it. You know, it could be the governor just doesn't sign it for whatever reason, and he could still die in prison. But you would have thought that the parole project, this would be at least a decent candidate for the parole project. But I don't know how they pick and choose how that works, really. So now that's when I ask you the question. Do you think that a man who killed another man in a bar fight, you want to believe that he was it possible he was being attacked? Was it possible he was in fear for his life? From the evidence, and if you want to say, like, so you would have said all the witnesses colluded against him. It's possible. But, I mean, with his record and the idea that he said he knew his life was over and that he ran out of state and was on the lam for 6 months, I mean, then you can argue he's a convicted felon. He's not allowed to own a gun. You don't want to go back to jail. But no, I don't. The guy was looking for a fight. His ego was bruised, and he was an instigator and just not a good guy. I don't believe he was in fear for his life. But how do you feel that a bar fight type situation, he should have more leniency versus others? I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. And please do like and subscribe. Help the channel grow. Keep me motivated to continue showing all of you the good, the bad, and the ugly of our court systems. With that, I'll let you go.